Council taking that spot.
I hereby call this meeting of the Norwood City Council to order. Please rise for the council prayer and pledge of allegiance. Our Father, who art in heaven, as a body we congregate in this council chamber. We pray for thy divine guidance that we may do all things well according to thy holy will. Amen. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Bonzo.
Here.
Mr. Gabbard.
Here.
Mr. Tracy.
Here.
Mr. Kelch.
Here.
Mr. DiNardo is running late. Mr. Thompson.
Here.
And Mr. Braden is absent. Currently, we have 5 members present. Mr. Gabbard.
Thank you, Mr. President. Considering how Mr. Braden is out tonight, and he is our clerk pro tem, and Maria, our clerk, is out as well. Hopefully, they're not too sick and will be able to be with us back real soon. I'd like to make a motion that Mr. Bonds will fill in as clerk pro tem for this meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Gabbard. May I have a second? Mr. Thompson.
Second.
Second by Mr. Thompson. Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Tracy?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
All members, we have 5 members present, voting aye. Motion passes. Mr. Bonzo is pro tem this evening. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Moving on to item E, amendment of agenda. This evening we have an ordinance to add. We're going to call it item L5. It is an ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into a utility easement agreement with Norwood Venture I, LLC for 36-inch storm water sewer pipe at 5050 Section Avenue and declaring an emergency. So we will add that to the agenda. Mr. Thompson.
I move that we revise the agenda as you've stated.
Motion by Mr. Thompson. May I have a second? Mr. Tracy.
Second the motion.
Second the motion. For the record, Mr. DiNardo is here.
Yes, thank you.
So please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall, yes. Mr. Gabbard,
Yes.
Mr. Tracy,
Yes.
Mr. Kelch,
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo. May you please reiterate what we're voting on?
Yes.
Amend agenda.
Okay,
We're amending the agenda. We're adding an
I'm
ordinance.
sure that's fine, yes. And Mr. Thompson?
Yes. Sorry.
Great.
We have 6 members present, all voting aye. Motion passes. Moving forward, we don't have any minutes to approve this evening. No public hearings, so we'll move right away to item H, request to address council. And we have 3 requests this evening. There we go. Thank you, sir.
Yes.
And the first request to address council is Mr. Peterson Mingo. Please come forward, sir, state your name, and you have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Good afternoon, or good evening, rather. Okay. Basically, want to speak concerning community relations. Relations usually means that there's something in common. I'm not going to be in front of you for long. I read at the bottom of this page, Gem of the Highlands. And that's a beautiful statement. Basically, it shows something valuable, something precious that you have. It also signifies giving, sharing, completeness, and coming together. A gem is something that other people want, other people feel they need, other people feel that they basically reach out and they search for. And so I believe that in every community, that's what should be happening. Everyone should be looking out and reaching out for something valuable to hold on to, something that distinguishes them from other communities, something outside of the norm, business as usual, whatever. In order to be precious, you have to sometimes be radical. in order to be radical, you have to first know that you're right. This statement, Gem of the Highlands. I grew up in Cincinnati after we got up here from Georgia. And coming down Montgomery Road, we would go out to Blue Ash and take our driver's exams and whatever, the written tests, and we had to walk back to Avondale. And as we would come through Norwood, there was always apprehension. This was back in 1966 and 1965. And it was always apprehension. We would get nervous coming through Norwood, and we would stay close to each other. As years passed, I'm happy to say that the closer I would get to Norwood, the safer I began to feel. Because Evanston is right next to Norwood, and I've been living in Evanston for 40 years. Norwood is definitely becoming the gem of the Highlands, but there's still work to be done. And if we can, as a collective body, and as citizens not only of Cincinnati, of also Norwood, because how many of us shop in Norwood? How many of us spend a whole day in Norwood? Quite a few of us. And so we have a vested interest in this gem of the Highlands. What makes it a gem is beauty, the brightness of it, and this brightness of it should be able to shine upon everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mingo. Our next request to address council is Mrs. Howard.
Hello, my name is Miss Howard. I'm here because I have concerns on the language that's being used in this community. And I have visited this community and shopped here and spent a lot of dollars on my hard-earned money for decades. And I still don't feel like they're treating me like I should be treating in this neighborhood. Because I still have a slight fear when I'm getting ready to turn into the city of Norwood. And I've been hearing statements that were made to younger children using certain language. I'm not going to bring it up, but I'm pretty sure all of you know about it. And I got really frustrated because in this day and age, I'm thinking, really? You know, we help build this community. Even though we're not out here all the time, we do come here and spend a lot of our money. And it should count. I mean, we're no different than everybody else. Pastor James, I know him, he's a personal friend of mine. And he has been trying to keep peace in this area for a long time. Out here by himself, just pounding the grounds all day long, trying to keep peace. And we're just out here trying to help him. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Mrs. Howard. And our last request to speak is Pastor Sonny James. Pastor James.
Thank you. Pastor Sonny James, 1830 Hopkins Avenue in Norwood, Ohio. Before I begin, let me first give my condolences to Miss Norma and her family. She did a wonderful job caring for my mother when my mother was here. And although I missed the homegoing, if Miss Norma is watching and listening, I want her to know that my heart goes out to her and her loved ones in their time of bereavement, missing her husband. Now, I come here meeting after meeting. We recently finally had the all committee and we talked about racial equity and coming together on a regular basis. I'm often challenged. People say, oh my God, he comes in, he says the same, oh, yada, 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 yada. But now if I were part of the kids on the street, when they have the hammer slammed down, they say, got him. Guys, on August the 7th, residents were at our Norwood pool, and staff have written letters, statements, confirming an incident that happened using the N-word. And here we are, more than a month later, and this administration has not satisfactorily addressed the issue. Now, it's not like we don't know that that happens. Mr. Thompson was at one of my Hearing Every Perspective meetings, and I had to ask him to take his women and children home as they were hearing the N-word being hurled in broad daylight. More than a month later, and our mayor has not called a meeting to say, listen, we've got to address this issue and we've got to address it now. Well, I want you to know, as I've said before, I'm not asking anymore. I don't have to. I am demanding that when we have appointed individuals, that they are held to the highest standard, just like I am. When they use inappropriate language, heavens, the Brennemans are part of the paintwork in Cincinnati. But when racially insensitive conversation happened over the air, he wasn't even allowed to finish the broadcast. Someone looked at him and said, "You're out of here." And I'm looking to this administration and everybody listening at home right now. This room should be packed. It should be filled. You've got your Black Lives Matter signs up. Some of them are colorful, painted really nice. You even have your children sitting in the backyard with a nice gold glass of iced tea, designing their special Black Lives Matter sign. But yet, when one of our prominent members, appointed specifically by our mayor to high-profile positions. Now, let's say it's not true, because the first thing I don't want anybody to say is that I'm saying that everybody in Norwood is a racist, because that is not true. But my granny, rest her soul, taught me something years ago. She said, "Baby, be careful who you hang with, because birds of a feather flock together." And for that woman, Miss Downs, to be able to be kicked out of the pool by the pool staff, something had to be wrong and inappropriate. And on her way out to say, wait until city council and the mayor absent hears about this. This is an issue that needs your immediate attention. And I'm demanding that each and every one of you publicly, before those that are voting, say your piece. And I mean tonight. And those of you who are watching, I thank you for calling me privately. But one day you're going to have to stand up and stand with me. And for those of you who have your Black Lives Matter signs out, if you're not willing to stand up for this cause, take your sign down and put up another one that says "Gone to lunch." It is time for racial equity in Norwood, and I ain't going anywhere. Over my dead body. When you eat, we want to eat. When you get a job, we want a job. When you get a grant, we want a grant. And doggone it, when you call me out of my name and call me the N-word, you better find a foxhole. It is not right. We are civil people. We only want to be treated that way. And I'm demanding the mayor and everybody listening, go to your email and write each council member. And if this isn't a priority to them, when you get in that voting booth, do a little shimmy, shimmy, slide to the left, slide to the right, and you put that pen down and you make it count for something. Enough's enough. God bless you all. And I pray each and every one of you tonight make a public stance. You know it was wrong, even if we got the facts wrong, because we're not going anywhere. Whether it's Reverend Mingo with the Southern Leadership Council, whether it's state representative who's probably driving high speed trying to get here tonight, whether it's our other civil rights national leadership, we're coming. And I mean, we're coming. And we ain't backing down. And I'm not asking for permission. I'm not sending a letter to the law director. If you want to talk about it, send me a letter. You want to meet with me? You call me 513-487-8843 or email me at pastorsonnyjames@gmail.com or stop by 1830 Hopkins Avenue, third house from the corner house. But when you show up, come right.
Thank you, Pastor James.
God bless you.
Moving on to item I, reports of standing committees of council, housing, health, and public safety, August 30th, 2021. Mr. Dracy.
Committee report, Housing, Health, and Public Safety, date August 30th, 2021, to the Honorable Council, City of Norwood, Ohio. We, your Committee of Housing, Health, and Public Safety, to whom it was referred, discussion of the chronic nuisance ordinance, beg leave to submit the following report. Members spoke with the Chief of Police, Law Director, Health Commissioner, and Building Department to start a plan in order to utilize the CNO. It was decided to reconvene within 2 weeks to find out what the Building Department would like to include it and any issues the Law Department has with the ordinance. Chief Kramer advised that the department heads would meet and discuss similar. Respectfully submitted, Matthew Geraci, Chairperson, Michael Gabbard, Chris Kelch, and James Bonzel.
Thank you, Mr. Dracy. Mr. Thompson.
Move that we receive and file the report.
Motion by Mr. Thompson to receive and file the report. May I have a second? Mr. Denoy.
Yes, please.
Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall? Yes. Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Dracy?
Yes.
Mr. Couch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo? Yes. Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion passes. Moving on to item I, Committee of the Whole, August 31st, 2021. Committee report, Committee of the Whole, dated August 31st, 2021, to the Honorable Council of the City of Norwood, Ohio. We, your Committee of the Whole, to whom was referred, racial equality, historical properties, alcohol on city property. Beg leave to submit the following report. Committee of the Whole met on August 31st, 2021, to discuss racial equality, historical properties, and alcohol on city property. Councilman Kelch introduced Pastor Sonny James, who spoke to council regarding his 13-point plan for leadership to effect positive change in Norwood. All council members present engaged in the discussion with Pastor James. Councilman Thompson asked that we table historical properties and alcohol on city property to old business at the next regularly scheduled council meeting. Respectfully submitted, Ken Miracle, Chairperson, Mr. Bonzel, Mr. Braden, Mr. Dracy, Mr. Kelch, and Mr. Thompson. Mr. Kelch.
With a receive and file report.
Motion by Mr. Kelch to receive and file the report. Mr. Dracy.
I'll second the motion.
Second the motion. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall? Yes. Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Dracy?
Yes.
Mr. Couch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo? Yes. Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
All members present voting aye. Motion passes. Moving on to item J. Third reading of ordinance and resolutions. J1, an ordinance authorizing the execution and delivery of a redevelopment agreement with Playing Card Partners LLC, authorizing cooperation with the Port of Greater Cincinnati Development Authority and the Columbus Franklin County Finance Authority to facilitate the issuance of Port Authority Development revenue bonds for the purpose of paying the cost of certain public improvements, authorizing the execution and delivery of a tax increment financing and cooperative agreement and all other documents and instruments necessary to effect such financing, authorizing and approving related matters and declaring an emergency. Mr. DiNardo.
May it please have the third reading.
Motion by Mr. DiNardo to have the third reading. Mr. Thompson.
Second it?
Second by Mr. Thompson. Any discussion? questions. Does anyone have any questions, any additional questions? I know we've talked about it past.
Yeah, we've talked about this quite a few times, but this is to authorize the issuance of the bonds by the Port Authority that'll be repaid with the TIF revenue generated by the U.S. playing card site redevelopment. Happy to talk about any more details or go back over it if you'd like, but
Okay.
most of the details have been discussed previously.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all. Have a good evening.
Please call roll.
Mr. Bonsall, yes. Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Dracy?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
All members present voting aye. The motion passes. May we have the third reading, Mr. Bonsall?
An ordinance authorizing the execution and delivery of a redevelopment agreement with Playing Card Partners LLC, authorizing cooperation with the Port of Greater Cincinnati Development Authority and the Columbus-Franklin County Finance Authority to facilitate the issuance of Port Authority development revenue bonds for the purpose of paying the cost of certain public improvements, authorizing the execution and delivery of a tax increment financing and cooperative agreement, and all other documents and instruments necessary to effect such financing, authorizing and approving related matters, and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mr. Bonsall. Mr. DiNardo.
May we please take a vote on this?
Motion by Mr. DiNardo. May I have a second? Second by Mr. Thompson. Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall, yes. Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Dracy?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
All members present voting aye. The ordinance passes. Moving on to item K1, second reading of ordinances. K1, ordinance adding Chapter 1761 of the Norwood Codified Ordinances to establish the Tobacco Products Sales Licensing Program. Mr. Dracy.
I'd like to make a motion to move this to the Housing, Health, and Public Safety Committee. I do have a few more questions regarding this ordinance itself for Mr. Williamson.
We have a motion by Mr. Geraci to move this to Housing, Health, and Safety. Mr. Kelch.
I'd second that motion.
We have a second by Mr. Kelch. Any discussion? Mr. Bonsall.
Yeah, thank you so
Go ahead,
much.
sir.
So, I would just recommend that council vote this motion down. We already had it in the Housing, Health, and Public Safety Committee.
No, we have-
I think that if we had we could just have a second reading tonight, and we could ask we had it in the Law and Ordinance Committee, apologize, but we can talk, the Health Commissioner is here, so if there's questions, I think we could ask, questions for him, but I would keep this on council. We've already had this in committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bonsall. Mr. Kelch.
Thank you, Mr. President. I support this move to the Housing, Health, Public Safety Committee for reading in the meeting there and discussion, largely because it wasn't a Law and Ordinance Committee, and they went through and did their things there, but this ordinance is kind of centered around public health, so I think there's some questions on that we kind of really need to look at and dig into here of how we're going to execute. Is this right for our city? There's still things in here that I don't like as far as, the fees for businesses to operate legally. I just really don't like those. There's questions I have on the safety of having, under 21-year-old kids going around, the efficacy of that, and how well that's going to be maintained as a program. Is that going to be okay with the workload? There's just a lot of questions still in this. So I would ask that council members go ahead and vote to put this back to committee. Let's address it and then bring it out and make sure it is an ordinance that is right for our city.
Anyone else? Mr. Thompson.
Quick question, just to refresh my memory, who's on the Law and Ordinance Committee? Quick question, who is on the Law and Ordinance Committee?
Myself, Mr. Gabbard, Mr. Bonsall, and Mr. Braden, I believe.
Okay.
Was that, you finished? Mr. DiNardo.
Do you have any, I heard three questions there. Do you have any other questions? Because those seemed legal questions. I heard if it's legal, I think that was one of your questions.
Yeah, well, there's more into this as far as, it seems like it's attacking tobacco use, which in talks with various residents and parents and that through passing, it seems that more people are concerned about vaping and vaping accessories. So if that is the true case, then maybe we need to organize this in a way that attacks that angle versus tobacco use in general. That's really a big one for me.
I'll follow up if that's okay.
Yes, sir.
I actually heard that too. So the other points, I would have voted no to move it there because those are legal questions. Since you're here, would you mind helping understand how this would attack vaping? Because I did hear that was something that seemed to be like more of a concern for folks, particularly parents.
Basically summarize how the health department has gotten to this point. We've had multiple interactions with different organizations coming to our Board of Health meeting. We're a triad of administrative staff. We're still supported by our medical director, Dr. Perino. And basically, with tobacco regulations, comparing them to where we were when Smoke-Free Ohio started, things have changed over time, and I think the regulations are trying to be broad to pick up any items that contain nicotine. To go back into the ordinance, it starts out as whereas there had been a decline in tobacco usage. However, because of e-cigarettes and other products, we're starting to see an increase of younger people using these products. So at this time, because of that increase in these new products, everything's being lumped together into one package, and the facilities that are licensed, that tends to be their main source of revenue. So this ordinance is following federal guidance to encourage locals to pick up this enforcement program locally.
So enforcement would not just be what I would consider, like, I think you called it combustibles. This would also
any product that contains nicotine.
So vaping.
So to me, it seems like
It helps.
a sweeping ordinance that covers the issue at hand, but it also covers other things that aren't necessarily a problem for children, which, I kind of think that's a little extra. I think if we retool this to just got their vaping products, I'd be fully on board with it, just based on my conversations with parents.
When these discussions were carried out with the Board of Health, basically the statistics, like most people that start using a tobacco product use it before 18, whatever that product may be. So I think that's why it has unanimous support from the Board of Health, is when our Board of Health members, whether they're previous employees, nurses, or doctors, have listened to the guidance from Ohio Tobacco 21 representatives and followed the recommendation to enforce it locally.
That's very helpful. Thanks for answering my questions.
Thank you. Mr. Thompson?
So for me, I honestly didn't have a problem with the first ordinance that came to us, but was happy to support sending to law and ordinance to clarify questions. I think those questions were clarified. I think you've just addressed the fact that this tackles both tobacco and nicotine-related products. This is a federal supported program, state-supported program. I'm not prepared to send this back into committee to stall it further. I think that the questions have been answered and we should just vote on this. And if for some reason it doesn't pass, then we'll try again in 3 months.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Mr. Dracy?
I'd like to ask for the courtesy of it at least going to the Housing, Health, and Public Safety Committee. And the reason being is that we sent another ordinance to other committees twice before voting on it, just so we could take a look at them and change different things. I've always compromised on this floor, whether it be here or whether it be in committees. And I'm asking for the same courtesy, at least with this, so that other members who did have questions regarding the health within this are able to get those answers, whether it be from Mr. Williamson or whoever else may attend that meeting. And if it comes out with no changes to it, then it comes out with no changes to it. But I think some of the health concerns that Mr. Kelch brought up are decent concerns and are worth discussing.
Thank you, Mr. Tracy. Mr. Thompson? Sorry to hear that.
Just one more point. I would like to point out that you're the chair of the Law and Ordinance Committee. It was already in your committee, and now you're asking to put it back into another of your committees. If you had concerns with this ordinance before it left your committee, you should have said something about that before letting it come out of committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Bonds?
Just to follow up on that, 3 of the 4 members are the same on both committees. So it's Mr. Gabbard, myself, and Mr. Dracy are on both committees. And we've always had a pretty open door policy. All of the committee chairs, last council session, all of the committee chairs this council session, has had a very open door policy so that other council members have been able to attend. And I personally appreciate that courtesy. So I, again, would just emphasize that to vote no on this and just see if we can have enough votes for the reading. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Tracy?
You are right, I am the chairman of the Law Committee, and however, this includes law and health. So we can't discuss the health issues in the Law Committee, just as Mr. DiNardo stated, well, you have 2 law questions, so we can't discuss those in the Housing, Health, and Public Safety Committee. That was just stated tonight. So,
My reason for saying that was to say that 2 of the 3 questions he brought up were law questions, and I imagine either were talked about or should have been talked about since the same players are all in
okay,
this.
well,
It's the same people.
I wasn't finished, but thank you.
You're right.
I'm just asking for the courtesy, since we've done this prior, and so that we can get full discussion on this from members that might want that discussion. That's all I'm asking.
Thank you, Mr. Tracy. Mr. Kelch?
Thank you, Mr. President. Just to kind of cover a couple points, I'm not on the Law Committee, so I don't prioritize those meetings. You know, I do have a couple other things going on. I wasn't able to make that meeting, so I was unable to address some of the concerns that I had with it. I've been pretty vocal about this ordinance since we've had it on the floor, and, you know, just to say, oh, I'm open invite and I can go there, that doesn't mean that I shouldn't be able to have my opinions heard here. And this kind of meeting isn't necessarily conducive for the kind of discussion that we want to have on this, much like a committee meeting would be, so we can make sure that we get the best ordinance for the city. So that's where I'm at. I'm going to support the motion to send it to the Housing, Health, Public Safety Committee meeting, where I can, you know, have my questions asked, answered, and we can deliver a quality ordinance. Thank you.
Mr. Kelch, any further discussion? The motion by Mr. Geraci, second by Mr. Kelch, is to move this ordinance into Housing, Health, and Public Safety. Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall, no. Mr. Gabbard,
No.
Mr. Dracy,
Yes.
Mr. Kelch,
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo,
No.
Mr. Thompson.
No.
All members voting, we have 4 noes, 2 yeses, motion fails. Mr. DiNardo?
Make a motion to have a second reading.
Motion by Mr. DiNardo to have a second reading. Mr. Thompson?
I would second that motion.
Second by Mr. Thompson. Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall, yes. Mr. Gabbard,
Yes.
Mr. Dracy,
Yes.
Mr. Kelch,
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo,
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
All members present voting aye. The motion passes. May we have the second reading? Mr. Bonzo?
Ordinance adding Chapter 1761 of the Norwood Codified Ordinances to establish the Tobacco Products Sales Licensing Program.
Thank you, Mr. Bonzo. Moving on to item L, introductory reading of ordinances and resolutions. L1, ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into a contract with Neptune Equipment Company as lowest and best bidder for the Norwood Water Meter Replacement and Integration Project, including remote read and data collection software and hardware, and declaring an emergency. Mr. Donato.
I'd like to have all 3 readings, if it gets that support.
Motion by Mr. DiNardo, have all 3 readings. May I have a second? Mr. Thompson?
I'll second.
Second by Mr. Thompson. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
I think Mr. Kelch, sorry. he came up
I'm
there at the
sorry.
end, yeah.
Mr.
Thank you,
Kelch.
Mr. President. I would just like to notate that this is, essentially using the entirety of our share of the American Recovery Funds. Just want to make that known before we do vote on this, since we do have the Elm project and all that stuff that we're talking about, so.
Thank you, Mr. Kelch. Anyone else? Any further discussion? Mr. DiNardo?
I do not think it's using the majority of the numbers. I've heard that.
I believe so it is, because we got it reduced.
Yep.
Gentlemen, please raise your hand and be recognized. Mr. DiNardo?
No, he's,
Anyone else?
I got my hand up.
Mr. Thompson?
Mr. DiNardo, if this is, how much do we have left after that?
yeah. We'll probably have about $900,000.
Okay.
And I think that we're phasing in, what I heard something like, it's gonna be like $200,000 for the original assessment. And we were likely, I think you threw out something like $1 million is what I remember you saying. So I don't know what something like $1 million, but I still think there's somewhere between $700,000, $900,000 available. So I was hoping that'd be sufficient. That's why I made that comment.
Thank you, Mr. DiNardo. Anyone else? Mr. Thompson?
Further question, because I, on council, haven't been privy to a lot of the conversations about the Elm Avenue project. I know we kicked it off a couple meetings ago. It's very important to all of us. I haven't seen any kind of financial information about that project come across our desk yet, other than what we approved at that time.
The assessment piece, you mean?
The assessment piece. Were there discussions about how we were going to fund the rest of the project? I'm asking Mr. Kelch, sorry.
Mr. Kelch?
Thank you, Mr. President. So we did talk about that at some meetings, and Mr. Gabbard could probably speak a little bit more on this as well. We did talk about the initial costs that we did approve that they are doing now. There are some talks about using no low-cost loans, grants, and that money we can find. However, with this money as well, there is a use-by date and an execute-by date of 2026. 2024 use-by, 2026, I believe, execute-by. So the point I was making was just simply so we can understand, hey, this is a lot, if not almost all, what we have for that. Just to make it seem, hey, is this what we want to spend that on, or do we want to wait and kind of see where we're going to be at?
Thank you, Mr. Kelch. Mr. DiNardo?
Yeah, this is probably less of a general counsel question, but if you're willing to answer it. Do you have an idea of when we truly just in our gut think we're going to get that assessment back?
Mr. Kelch?
Thank you, Mr. President. I do not. A couple meetings ago, the mayor did give us a timeline, kind of a rough timeline sheet from JMA. I don't have that in front of me with the dates on it. However, I think if Mr. Schneider, Mayor Schneider is here, or it becomes later, he'd probably be able to answer that during administrative reports.
If I might interject, Mr. Zimmerman is here, if he has any insight he would like to share with us on that.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you. Clint Zimmerman, Superintendent of Public Works, City of Norwood. So, just to reiterate, the lowest and best bid was from Neptune, and it did come in at a $2,014,000 bid. They were lower than the next bid by about $400,000. As far as, I'm not sure about as far as the assessment for when that's going to be coming in from, I believe JMA is doing it. I know we just got an authorization for tickets utilities to be marked in the area so they could do some soil borings. So I know they are working on that. Excuse me. Moving forward, as far as the water meter system itself, part of the reason why I believe this needs to be addressed currently is because after the water audit that we just finished, the hydraulic study that we just finished, we're showing a 28% non-revenue water loss, which means there's roughly about 3 million gallons of water that we're losing a year. Now currently, What we need to be focusing on is making sure that we're setting a base so that we can do the infrastructure upgrades moving forward that need to happen to keep the system safe and viable. As you know, we've had a lot of news stories about Norwood and the water system in the past. We have moved past that, made some of the adjustments that we need to make. Part of the reason why we ended up in that situation was because we didn't do the investment into the infrastructure that we needed to do. We've still got a lot to do, and I mean a lot to do. That will not be possible on the scale that it needs to be if we do not have people paying the proper amount for their water. I think we are probably, with some of the studies that I've read through this exact kind of system being installed other places, they've seen anywhere from an 8 to 11% increase in revenue. That's, given what our revenues are, that's going to be anywhere between $350,000, $400-something thousand a year. That puts it as paying for itself roughly 4.5 to just under 6 years. And I will say, as far as the Elm and Franklin project, just to put that in perspective, there was House Bill 168 that was just passed, I think for $240 or $260 million to provide infrastructure funds. And it required the Hamilton County Auditor and the other auditors for other counties to submit a top 10 priority list for things, for funding, for scoring priorities. I think we already scored pretty high there, but through working with JMA, myself and Jennifer Vatter, we were able to lobby the Hamilton County engineer, Eric Beck. We were able to get that on the Hamilton County auditors, or Hamilton County engineers priority list. We ranked 4th. That's going to go, that doesn't guarantee an award. We asked for $2 million for the project. Maximum award is $5 million. That's not the only thing we applied for, but that is the only thing we lobbied to get on the priority list. We had lots of information, all the pictures from the previous flooding. It carried a lot of weight, so we were able to get that. Like I said, it does not guarantee an award, but it does go a long way as the scoring. So let's factor that in as well. And my last point would be, I don't think it's something where we need to be looking at like we're going to do one or the other. We need to do everything. We need to do it all. But I wouldn't want to hold up one project that can move now for a project that may be 9 to 12 months out, realistically.
Thank you, Mr. Zimmerman. Any questions for Mr. Zimmerman?
Well, it's not a question for Mr. Zimmerman. So I'll hold. I have a comment.
Okay. Mr. Gabbard?
A couple questions, Clint, and I really appreciate you being here tonight just to answer what you've already covered there, which brought a lot of light to this as well. This will cover all meters for the whole city, correct?
This will cover any meter that is owned by the city of Norwood, which means it will be any meter 1 inch or less, so 1 inch, 3/4, and 5/8 inch meters. Any meter above 1 inch, the city of Norwood is not currently owned, it's owned by the property owner. So an industrial meter, 1 inch and higher would be something that would not be phased out as part of this. We would not have to pay for it. Now, there will be something coming that will be in the works that we're going to have to require the property owners to have their meters tested, and if they do not fall within a certain range of the AWWA standards for being an accurate meter, then they're probably going to be on the hook to change out their meter.
Follow-up question.
Yes, sir, Mr.
And then you said that this Neptune came in about $400,000 under as far as the lowest bid.
Mm-hmm.
Have you spoken with any other cities or communities that currently use them?
5.
All right, super. And they're all pleased?
Very pleased. I was actually, I kept going trying to find somebody. At first, I started out trying to find somebody, I wanted a light community, something of a rough, similar size, similar service connections and whatnot. And then I started going to the larger projects where, you're doing almost 1 million meters, and found nothing but good things about this particular company. As far as no glitches, as far as how the installation went, the integration of the software, no glitches, because what we're going to end up seeing if this project goes forward is a much more streamlined water department. And I know that some of the problems that we've had, some of the complaints with the water department in the past, has been people calling up about getting these outrageous bills, okay? That is because normally, not all the time, but the vast majority of those times, it's usually because we've had to estimate the bill, somebody hasn't been able to get in for a while, right? And then it just ends up throwing a wrench in. The estimated readings are never good. This would completely eliminate that. We would be able to get the information in real time. If you needed to sell your home, we would no longer have to send somebody out to go in your house to take a final reading. We'd be able to log right on the computer and see what the reading is currently. And eventually we could get to a point where we could send out email notifications to somebody when we start setting a priority range. If you start having a leak at your house or a usage that's outside of the norm, we could automatically generate an email to that person once they sign up an account, letting you know, hey, your usage is starting to peak. You need to take a look and make sure you don't have something around your house. To try to be a little more proactive about leaks as well. There's a lot of pros with this. I realize it's a large price tag, but it is an investment that will pay for itself.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Newman. Mr. DiNardo?
Yeah. I wanted to speak to Chris with you here, only because I recognize that this is a massively personal thing for you, particularly talking about the Elm Avenue project. I think this is tough because we have something that we need to do now, and we have something that we can't do for a little bit until we get the assessment back. Now, actually, I've been operating under the ballpark of $1 million, and I think we all have. That's the number we've been throwing out. Here in Clint, whose opinion most of us usually take as gospel, say $2 million, it's like, dang. Probably said that not just because you want a little buffer, it's probably going to cost about $2 million. That's what I'm hearing you say. So I am a little torn, more so than I was about 15 minutes ago, because I thought it was going to be $1 million, and I thought we were going to basically have enough for both. Equally, maybe we should not do all 3 readings, and I may rescind it, only because I want to take a second on the math of the $2 million which is double what we thought we were playing with. I also want to keep in mind about the fact that we're number 4, potentially 4 out of 10. We have reasonably high probability of being able to do both, regardless of where it falls. And maybe if we had a week or so, we may get up to the same. We may end up in the same exact place. Let's do the thing that we need to do ASAP. And hopefully in, 6 months we find out what Hamilton County awards us, and we do that. That might time with JMA anyway. But I can appreciate that there's a lot going on, and that number sort of changed things for me when you said 2.
Thank you, Mr. DiNardo. That's all, Mr.
If I may answer
Oh, go
that
ahead.
point.
Go ahead, Mr. Summerlin.
I do want to make clear, the $2 million was above what JMA, slightly above what JMA redid their numbers on, based on right now we're seeing an incredible increase in material prices. So that was to reflect that, and that does also include I believe, 20 or 30% contingency in case something were to go south on the job. So what we didn't want to do is have them come back and say, yes, you've been awarded the money, and the money be short.
I understand.
So
it's a smart move. It's just that was more like now the math don't work sort of thing. So,
Mr. Joyce?
I apologize for this, but seems to be this council's MO is to ask questions. How is this going to affect the residents once it's installed, as far as, let's say it's installed and the first reading comes in massively high from what an estimate was, and all of a sudden the resident's on the hook for $1,500?
If an AMI system goes in, it meets AWW standards, and it would be an accurate reading. I think if you had something that high, that would fall under the service director's, under his jurisdiction, as far as whether or not he wanted to adjust the bill or not, or try to find something. The first thing we're going to do is go out there and try to figure out where you got a leak, because if the AMI system comes back and it starts reading, it'll start reading in real time, and it will start showing you how much usage every hour.
Right.
2 hours.
What I'm meaning is if it's installed in between billing cycles,
Okay.
and they estimated it like low, and then all of a sudden the next billing cycle comes back with this automatic reading, and it's
I understand where you're at.
enormously high, and now we're at $1,500 bill.
I understand where you're at now. What would happen is basically as they take the old meter out, they take a reading off of that meter, put a new meter in, and so that the readings sync up for the next charge. But if the reading that they get off the meter they take out is much different than what's already on file, then the property owner would be on the hook for the usage. I mean, but that's, if it is an old meter, chances are that usage is probably off in the low side. Because what we've seen is traditionally, just everyone that we've ever done in the last 25 years, we send it out to get tested. If it's an old horn style meter, it never tests accurate, and they're never fast. They're always slow. So when you run a gallon in it, it doesn't register a gallon. You run 10 gallons through it, it doesn't register a gallon. It's a known quantity they send through the meter when they bench test it. And when it comes back as being only 88% effective, when those things come back and you've got a high bill, well, that's because somebody didn't get in there to read the meter usually. It's typically not a leak. Sometimes it is, but it's typically because somebody wasn't able to get into the building. This would completely eliminate somebody having to go into the building. This is no more the guy with the big Mayberry key ring going in your house, which presents its own safety problems as far as I'm concerned.
I understand that. I'm hoping that the administration takes this into consideration and kind of works through the growing pains of this.
Sure, and I don't think my position is, we're not out to gouge anybody. We're just trying to make sure that what gets used is what's accurately built. And as long as we have a handle on our finances for what's being used, we can more effectively judge what kind of rate increases are going to have to be for the future, because material prices always go up, labor always goes up. That's something, in fact, that we have to take into consideration going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Tracy. Mr. Bonzo.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I did just want to note that we have not used any part of the American Rescue Act funds so far. So there's been no spending so far in that account. So it's not like there's been funds that have spent there. The other item is, so by doing it out of this account, it benefits actually our residents more. Because if we were to do this out of the utility account, it would actually be, we would have to raise rates in order to pay for the meters. And so if people are already upset about high prices and high bills, then I don't exactly know what the cost is per meter, but it would, people would be more upset because now they're going to get these one-time charges on their meter because we don't have the cash there. And then, I think there's enough money, Mr. Kelch too, I think there is enough money in the general fund, like if we had to make a significant investment in Elm Avenue from it, I think there is enough money there. I mean, there's a significant amount there. It looks like it's going to work. I would just say that, I think we all share that priority. Whatever we have to do to get it done, I think we all want to see that.
Mr. Kelch.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, I'd like to say thank you, Mr. Zimmerman. This information was huge, very, very eye-opening for the residents. I think it's very quality information for them to hear. I feel comfortable supporting this with that information. I know there's been talks like, oh, we want to, we think we can. I would like, though, going forward with the Elm project, like a resolution, something like that, to double down on our commitment to pay for that project regardless of what we have to do. I would like that, but I feel comfortable supporting this. I think it's good quality, brings our water up to the 21st century. So thank you for that information and letting the residents hear that.
Thank you, Mr. Kelch. Mr. DiNardo.
Yeah, and echo, you're not always here when we talk highly about you, so for all the times that we said, thank you, Clint, thanks. As usual, great job. I'd like to actually keep all three readings, but I think that that's a great point, and this council will make a commitment to, in 2 weeks, put a resolution that makes sure if seats change, it's on the books that we got to take care of. That's a great point, and I think it makes sure that we make good by the promises we made a couple weeks ago. Good point. So I'd like to keep it.
Thank you, Mr. DiNardo. Any further discussion? We have a motion by Mr. DiNardo, second by Mr. Thompson, to have all three readings. Mr. Bonzo, please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall? Yes. Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Tracy?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
All members present voting aye. The motion passes. Mr. Bonzo, may we have all three readings, please?
Ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into a contract with Neptune Equipment Company as lowest and best bidder for the Norwood water meter replacement and integration project, including remote read and data collection software and hardware, and declaring an emergency. Ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into a contract with Neptune Equipment Company as lowest and best bidder for the Norwood Water Meter Replacement and Integration Project, including remote read and data collection software and hardware, and declaring an emergency. Ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into a contract with Neptune Equipment Company as lowest and best bidder for the Norwood Water Meter Replacement and Integration Project, including remote read and data collection software and hardware, and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mr. Bonzo. Mr. Gabbard.
Make a motion, we pass the ordinance.
Motion by Mr. Gabbard to pass the ordinance. Mr. Donato.
Yes, please. A second.
Second by Mr. Donato. Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall, yes. Mr. Gabbard.
Yes.
Mr. Dracy.
Yes.
Mr. Kelch.
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the ordinance passes. Moving on to item L2. Ordinance amending section 509.09 of the codified ordinances of the city of Norwood, Ohio, entitled Disturbing the Peace. Mr. Thompson.
Yeah, just a quick question to the law director. This to me looked like we're just basically clarifying language. And this, do you know if that's the case, or is this like a major revision?
Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. President. The purpose of the change would be to clarify the language of what we mean by an owner under it. If for disturbing the peace, it's generally the person that's making the noise that you cite. The police, it's right up for that. But we want to make sure that the owner of the property can also be cited if they're involved. And we had a case, and we thought it was clear that somebody that owns the LLC that owns the building would be an appropriate owner to charge, and the judge threw it out and said, no, that's the wrong person. So we wanted to clarify. If you are the sole shareholder of an LLC or a corporation, and that corporation owns this building, and you're involved in, in the what's going on in the building that the business you're running is causing a disturbance, that's an appropriate person to charge. Because that's the way we've done it in the past. We've never had anybody question it before. So we just wanted to clarify because we think that's the intention of the statute, or the ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Any other discussion? Need a motion?
Yeah.
Mr. Bonzo?
Thank you. I would move that we have all three readings.
Motion by Mr. Bonzo to have all three readings. May I have a second? Mr. DiNardo.
Yes, please.
Any further discussion? Mr. Gabbard.
I'll support the ordinance. My only concern is why didn't we make all the times more universal, like 7 to 9 p.m.? Because like on one, it's, 9 p.m., 6 a.m., another it's 9 a.m., 9 p.m., 7 a.m., another's 8 p.m. How come we didn't just make it more universal? I questioned through to the law department, I'm sorry.
Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, the times and the activities, those are our policy decisions. This just happened, and so Mr. Garcia, we should change this to make it clear. Yes, we should. That makes perfect sense. So that's the only amendment that we're suggesting. If council wants to go through and change those hours on, I think this includes like cutting the grass and things like that. If you want to go in and have those discussions, that's fine. It's entirely up to you. I've sat through those discussions, and I understand it can be a valuable exercise. So, but this is the only reason this is here. Is the law department is just recommending that we clarify exactly what we mean by owner.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Dracy, have your hand up, sir?
Looking through this, and I'll support it. Thinking back to other meetings that we've had regarding especially the CNO, there are some things in here or at least one thing in here that's slightly vague. But again, we'd have to throw it in the law department to discuss it, or law committee to discuss it and figure it out. But, unreasonable noises seems to be extremely vague. And I agree with the times. They seem to be all over the place for several items. But I'll support it if we want to go with the three readings, and we can make the changes later down the road if we need to.
Thank you, Mr. Tracy. Anyone else? We have a motion by Mr. Bonzel, second by Mr. DiNardo, have all three readings. Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzel, yes. Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Couch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion passes. May we have all three readings, Mr. Bonzel?
Yes. Ordinance amending Section 509.09 of the codified ordinances of the City of Norwood, Ohio, entitled Disturbing the Peace. Ordinance amending Section 509.09 of the codified ordinances of the City of Norwood, Ohio, entitled Disturbing the Peace. Ordinance amending Section 509.09 of the codified ordinances of the City of Norwood, Ohio, entitled Disturbing the Peace.
Thank you, Mr. Bonzel. Mr. DiNardo?
Can we please pass the ordinance?
Motion by Mr. DiNardo to pass the ordinance. May I have a second? Mr. Thompson?
Second.
Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzel, yes. Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Couch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the ordinance passes. Moving on to item L3, ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2021 and declaring an emergency. Mr. DiNardo.
May I please have all three readings?
Motion by Mr. DiNardo to have all three readings. Second by Mr. Bonzel. Any discussion? Mr. DiNardo.
Oh, do you have a question?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
Go ahead, Mr. Tracy.
Through the chair to Mr. DiNardo, the Norwood Arts Fund, $500.
Yeah, I actually don't know exactly what that is. I imagine it's a donation of some sort. These were both increases because the funds had revenue increases in them. So the 20K that you saw in drug enforcement, I think it was, that's because they bus related.
Right.
The 500, I imagine follows suit, but I actually don't know where the 500 came
I
from.
didn't even know we had a Norwood Arts Fund.
We voted, sorry.
Mr. Bonzel.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would say, yes, this council voted to create the Norwood Arts Fund, so it was there for the purpose that Mr. DiNardo stated, so that they've got donations. It does not, I mean, we would have to actually specifically pass something if we were going to transfer something from the general fund to the arts fund, so it's not money that we're transferring. It's literally just giving them permission to spend dollars that they already have. So
Do you know,
Mr. DiNardo?
I imagine it was a donation to, we could just ask Jim, but I don't actually know the answer to you.
Yeah, I do not, so it's, I don't think Jim would give it to us if it wasn't. So,
Okay, cool. So that's what it,
Thank you, gentlemen.
that's where the $500 is probably from.
Thank you. Anyone else? Mr. Tracy?
What's, I'm still confused on the $500 of why it's going to an arts board. I mean, it's an unpaid board, right?
That's not,
Mr. DiNardo?
sure. I think it allows us to tell them that they're allowed to go spend the money that someone donated. I think that's the point.
Thank you, Mr. DiNardo. Mr. Gabbard?
I was going to say the same thing. The Arts Board is looking at hosting or providing some different events that are art-related, and so they will be out trying to get donations, acquire, funds to be able to do those type of things within our city.
Did that answer the question?
It's fine.
But
As long as it's not coming out of the general fund, I'm good.
But to be clear, yeah, those are not paid positions. Those funds are for them to use as an arts board to do something. And those monies are, as far as I was under the understanding, we weren't putting any money from the general fund into that. So this $500 has to be a donation of some sort, or they raise the money somehow, but that equals 500.
Anyone else? Motion by Mr. DiNardo, second by Mr. Bonzel to have all three readings.
Yes,
Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzel, yes. Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Tracy?
Yes.
Mr. Couch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion passes. May we have all three readings, Mr. Bonzel?
Ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2021 and declaring an emergency. Ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2021 and declaring an emergency. Ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2021 and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mr. Bonzo. May I have a motion, please? Mr. DiNardo.
May you please pass the ordinance?
Motion by Mr. DiNardo to pass the ordinance. May I have a second? Mr. Bonzo.
I'll second.
Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall, yes. Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Tracy?
Yes.
Mr. Couch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the ordinance passes. Moving on to item L4. An ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into an agreement with Paycor Incorporated to provide payroll processing, payroll tax filing, and related services to the City of Norwood and declaring an emergency. Mr. Darno.
Before I made a motion, since no one did, can I ask a question to the mayor, please?
Of course.
Yeah. What's the timing? Do we have, is this something that we need to put into place for payroll processing now? Or is this going to replace something Jan 1?
Mr. Mayor.
Implementation's going to take a little bit of time, so we're looking at a January 1st kickoff of this thing. We'd like for it to start with the calendar year. We'd like to get this passed in 3 readings if we could tonight. This is an important improvement to the way the city handles our payroll and quite frankly, how all of our employees will have the ability to look at their time banks and their sick leave and then tracking employees' time and hours. So this is an important part of it. If I could, I have Keith Hamrick, who's our HR administrator. He's working as the executive assistant to the mayor, but also as the HR administrator. And Keith could probably walk you guys through the process that it's been taken to get where we are. And Paycor, we looked at 2 others actually, but Paycor right here in our hometown actually beat all the others. So if you don't mind, can we get Keith to come up to the microphone and talk for a minute? Keith, will you just walk them through sort of the process from when you first got started with this?
Yeah, so actually when I started in May with the City of Norwood, this is the first project I really took on, and I actually vetted 13 different companies. I demoed 10, and then I actually brought to the mayor and the auditor 3 that I thought that were the top company. So I did my homework. I think we picked the best company. And what this company will actually do is, like the mayor said, was really give a little bit of visibility from the employees aspect to their own payroll, their own time banks and everything like that. And be able to track the employees, their time better. Right now it takes about 4 days to process payroll. This would actually bring it down to 1 day. So now the auditor's office can do some additional tasks and maybe improve the employees' lives a little bit better just on that and do their own auditing and stuff like that. So so it's not just going to help us do like the HR aspects, but I think it's going to help in almost every department as well, because the department heads can track their employees better. The employees can track their own time banks. If they want to look at their own employee files, those would be the majority of them will be electronic. So a lot of these requests that might be coming through the mayor's office to even just view their own employee files, we won't have to waste that time and the administration. I can be focusing on other things because the employees can actually do that kind of stuff. So it's these little things that you don't really think about that can
Thank you.
Mr. Tracy.
So you stated you had brought the top 3 companies to the mayor and safety service director or whatever. Was this the lowest company?
Not initially, but I did bring them down, and they are the lowest company.
Okay. I'm just trying to figure out how we can't optimize our current process to fit what we need
Because
with the employees that we have. Because this is a $39,000 investment, $35,000 after the first year. Are we gonna let an employee go to get that 35,000 back? I mean, now essentially you'd have 3, 4 employees with less work to do.
It's my understanding we are currently paying software solutions as well, so we wouldn't have that payment either. But we would not be able to optimize our own system because we don't have the infrastructure in yet. And if we want to do it ourselves, I believe it would cost a lot more.
Have you looked into that? Have you
No.
looked into how much it would cost to optimize our system?
The current system cannot, we would have to switch no matter what. So yeah, so sorry, I must have misunderstood what you were trying to ask.
The
But yeah, so
question is, have you looked into a system to optimize what we have?
our current system, the current system is lacking a lot of customizations. So you can't really do, like, they don't have time clocks. They don't have the ability to process time banks. Like, a lot of these things that we're gaining with when we pay for it, our current system doesn't have that capability, so there's no way to optimize.
Can you replace the current system? I guess I'll rephrase it again. Can you replace the current system with something that might be a little less expensive than $39,000 to optimize the process?
From what I saw, no. This is what all these quotes are coming back for. If we took a company that did not do payroll and we kept our own payroll system, yes. We could optimize time clocks, we could do all the HR side, but a lot of our difficulties is on the payroll side. It's a lot of the cost is coming from them taking over our payroll.
Well, at first you had said you hadn't looked into anything. Now you're saying from what you saw.
No, I couldn't optimize our current system because our current system cannot be improved upon because there's no customization there.
I'm sorry, anybody else?
Mr. Kelch.
I think, Mr. President, I'm not totally against this. I think there's some upside to it as far as freeing up some other employees to do other things for the city, which is always great. One question I have is the pay schedule. Is that going to change at all, or are they still going to expect their checks when they're used to getting them?
Yep.
All right.
Yep, and they will actually be able to get their pay stubs electronically, so we don't actually have to mail them out or hand them to them or anything. And that's what would cut down a lot of these times. Our payroll coordinator is taking an entire day just to stuff envelopes. That's all she does on Thursday. So this would cut down on her time. So there's a lot of these little building blocks that are going to stack on top of each other that's going to be more efficient, and because there's a lot of time-consuming elements that are in our current processes.
Yeah, and you said we were paying software solution. Do you know how much we're paying them currently? How much we kind of be saving in a way?
I don't know the exact number. Do you know, Victor? I don't know the exact number of what we're paying software solutions, but I believe it's in the same ballpark.
Thank you, Mr. Kelch. Mr. Leonardo?
Yeah. I'm maybe making sure that we get support for this because I think it's absolutely necessary that we find a way to take multiple people from 4 days down to 1. That's an enormous efficiency. You don't see that often. So we should definitely try to do that. If it would make some of our council members feel better about this, if we did 2 readings and then got the answer for how much the current system, what we'd be tacking on, or the incremental cost. I imagine it's not going to be too much, and I'd be hard pressed to see how you can stack that up against, saving days. But nonetheless, if we can do 2 and then 1 and get an answer for what that incremental cost would be, hopefully that's enough to allay any fears that some of you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Leonardo. Mr. Bonzo?
Thank you very much. I think one thing that's not being noted is that this is not just payroll, but there's timekeeping, there's other stuff, there's a lot of other benefits like career management and other things that are included in this that I think are going to help take the city to the next level. And I think also, if you look, some of the ways that they keep the time cards today, I think that, or at least the time banks, I think they use Excel files today,
yes,
Mr. President. So those Excel files, you get one formula error, then an employee could be, either have less time than they thought they should have, or they could have more time. And so there could be errors costing the city money or costing employees money. And either way, that's negative. I'm not saying there are errors. I'm just saying that kind of happens when you're kind of in this Excel format. So to me, it's important. And then I also think that, I mean, the mayor's here, they also brought it forward, so I mean, I'd be curious what the mayor thought on this as well.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bonzo. Mr. Tracy, I saw you had your hand up.
I'm not 100% opposed against this. It's a lot of information for us to look over in 3 days. I'd much rather have this sent over to committee of the whole so that we could ask questions about it versus me calling the mayor or, what's your name? Keith, to ask questions over the phone and go back and forth. That way we have it all in one area because, again, it's a lot of money and we seem to be spending a lot of that this year.
Thank you, Mr. Jersey. Mr. Kelch.
Thank you, Mr. President. Another question I have is so we had that checklist from state we got to work through. Does this help us accomplish some of those goals there and check some of those boxes? For instance, paying contractors faster. Is this going to help us in that? Or is this solely
This is solely just for employees, so
Okay.
we won't be paying any vendors or outside of HR related stuff.
Okay, cool.
But I would like to add on is that we have been having a lot of payroll issues for our employees now that have cost either time or money for the city just by paying for grievances or stuff like that. So I just want to tack that on to what you said, was that it would really help with getting payroll right the first time rather than having employees leave us because their paycheck's always wrong. So I just want to tack that on as well.
Thank you.
Mr. Bonzo.
Thank you very much. So, I mean, I'm seeing, when he was talking about the errors that were costing employees money, I'm seeing the fire chief in the back shaking his head yes, agreeing that there are issues with the current system. I mean, Mr. Fire Chief, do you mind coming up? Could you talk about some of the issues with the current process?
Well, sure. You speak to the payroll system. It's archaic. We have a scheduling software we run where I should be able to download it into a CSV sheet and submit it to payroll. Now, we are using duplicate carbonless copy payroll sheets to turn in on a bi-weekly basis to do payroll. That's insanity. It's 2020. The fire department specifically has had a number of payroll issues. Some of it was personnel related, but other things are tracking issues in terms of incorrect rates being put into an archaic SSI system. The changeover with SSI was brutal. I think the auditor would speak to that as well. This city is long overdue for a contemporary HR system with electronic payroll. The amount of money this city spends on duplicate carbonless copy payroll sheets, I'd love to see. And then envelopes and paper copies of their payroll every 2 weeks for 100 and something employees, 26 times a year. Why? To me, this is a no-brainer. I can tell you from the fire department side that our executive assistant or administrative assistant spends at minimum 3 hours every day with payroll. And it's duplicate effort. We already have it. It's done. We have our payroll done for the year in the computer system, and all we would do is change it with sick time or overtime. But because we have to process these sheets and then turn them in, speaking to the employee time banks, we actually keep the employee time banks at the fire department, and then we'll go back and forth with the auditor's office because there have been numerous mistakes with those. It's the nature of the business, unfortunately. To say that we won't do some of those things still with a third-party vendor, we'll still keep our time banks to make sure. Payroll is really a basic function that the city should be optimized, not dragging their feet on, in my opinion.
Thank you, Chief McKay.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Tracy?
I do agree. It should be optimized. That's not the question. I think we need to try and, at least if this goes into a committee, we have a little bit of time to actually look at, can we optimize the system we have? Can we get a similar system, possibly cheaper? That doesn't seem like it's been looked into or investigated.
Just
Anyone else?
I I just say this is the cheapest system that I found. So that's
But
just
you had stated you hadn't really looked into how much it would cost to
optimize our current
bring
system,
it
which
in.
can't.
Okay.
I mean, I got quotes for about 8 different systems, and that's the whole thing. Is that you asked me about optimizing our current system. I couldn't do that, so that's I can't give you a price because that doesn't exist. So we would have to bring in a new system.
Correct. But did you look into the pricing of a new system?
That's what we're doing.
Okay.
Because I'm confused on the
Okay.
question, man. I'm sorry.
Bringing it to the auditor's office, a system, a payroll system, bringing it to the auditor's office so our employees can do that. Have you looked into that?
You mean doing an inside payroll?
Correct.
That's what we're doing now, and that's what the
Without the Excel spreadsheets, I mean,
no. That's,
okay. This is why I wanted it to go to committee, but that's fine.
Well, that's the kind of system that we have now, and that's what we don't.
I'll call and talk to you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Thompson?
Thanks. One thing I'd like to point out is that this is wrapping all of our payroll and timekeeping into a company that is local, that does this for a living, for the cost per year of about half of an employee, which seems a good deal. To Mr. Geraci's question about why don't we build our own system, Paycor is one of the fastest growing companies in the area because it's so expensive and prohibitive to build your own internal pay system and HR systems. I mean, they're made to help save cost on that kind of a thing because it is time prohibitive, it is costly, it takes lots of maintenance. They're able to sort of, group everybody together and do it. So I have no doubt that this is less expensive than trying to build an internal system from scratch. To me, this is the kind of thing that we should be doing all the time as a city, is looking for efficiencies, looking for savings, looking for things that are going to be sustainable going forward. This to me is like a no-brainer cost. It's very low, and we get a lot of bang for our buck.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Mr.
Just
Herman?
add one more thing, was that if we were to build our own system, we would have to hire more IT support as well. And one of the biggest issues that we have now is that we cannot build our own patchwork for the system because we do have our own enclosed payroll system. We don't have a cloud-based system. So when there's an update that needs to happen, the company can't just push out an update like Paycor could. We would actually have to request them to have access to our system. So in order to build our own patchwork, we would have to have a whole IT staff, which again would cost more money than this a year as well.
Thanks, Keith. Thank you very much. Gentlemen, Mr. DiNardo?
I don't think a motion's been made,
No, it has not.
so I'd like to make a motion to have all 3 readings.
Motion by Mr. DiNardo to have all 3 readings. May I have a second?
I'll second that.
Mr. Bonzel? Any further discussion? Please, Mr. Tracy?
What changed your mind from 2 readings to 3?
I felt the support was there. I wanted 3 in the first place, and I think there's only you who have questions.
Absolutely, I do.
Yeah.
I mean, I can go on, but I don't want to keep going on in this meeting.
So I think we have the vote. If it gets not enough people want to have 3 readings, then we won't. That's why I'm keeping it.
Thank you, Mr. DiNardo. Anyone else? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall, yes. Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Tracy?
No.
Mr. Couch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes?
All members present, we have 5 yes, 1 no. We cannot have, motion fails, we cannot have all 3 readings. Mr. Thompson?
Move we have 2 readings of this ordinance, please?
Motion by,
Yep, Mr. I'll second that, please.
second, Mr. Thompson and Mr. Bonzel for 2 readings. Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall, yes. Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Tracy?
Yes.
Mr. Couch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
All members present voting aye, motion passes. Mr. Bonzel, may we have 2 readings, please?
An ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into an agreement with Paycor, Inc. to provide payroll processing, payroll tax filing, and related services to the City of Norwood and declaring an emergency. An ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into an agreement with Paycor, Inc. to provide payroll processing, payroll tax filing, and related services to the City of Norwood and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mr. Bonsall. Moving on. Item L5, ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into a utility easement agreement with Norwood Venture I, LLC, for a 36-inch stormwater sewer pipe at 5050 Section Avenue and declaring an emergency. Mr. Thompson.
We have all three readings of the ordinance.
Motion by Mr. Thompson to have all three readings. May I have a second? Mr. Kelch?
Second.
Second by Mr. Kelch. Any discussion? Mr. Gabbard?
Through the chair to the law department, Mr. Moore, if you could just give us a briefing on this. I know we did get an email on it, but if you could just give us a briefing so at least the general public would have as well.
Sure.
Thank you. 100 years ago or so, the city built a stormwater main diagonally across the lot that American Laundry sits on now. It was put really, really far down because the subway line was supposed to go through there. The people that own the American Laundry building now want to sell it. And as part of their title search, the buyer's title search, they couldn't find an easement that covered this. And generally, if there's, you've got the easement, allows the power lines to go through, allows water, sewer lines, that kind of thing over your property. There is none, and they're worried that if something goes wrong, the city won't fix it and the building will collapse or whatever might happen. I think that as a matter of Ohio law, if one of the city's infrastructure, pieces of infrastructure, public utility stuff has a problem, it's on us to fix it regardless. But they wanted an easement agreement. We went back and forth as to what exactly that should be in that. What we have here is essentially a standard utility easement. So if Duke wants to put, or Spectrum or whoever, like, we're going to put this line through here, this is what the easement would be. This is what the agreement would be. Basically, it says the city has permission to go onto the property to maintain what they have, which is what allows Duke to cut down the trees that are impinging on the lines, or allows them to dig up your sidewalk if there's a problem with the gas line kind of thing. And they are in a hurry to close this deal. The people that are buying it have great intentions of doing really great stuff, which is nice to hear. Of course, you don't believe it till the steel goes up, but we like to hear that when somebody's buying property. So I'm hoping the council can pass this. Again, this does not obligate the city to do any more than it already would. If there's a problem with the sewer line, just like there was up at PetSmart when it was, the line under that was dissolving, was crumbling. We didn't say, well, show us the easement. That means that we have to do so. No, we just fix it because we own it. So I'm asking the council passes this. I'm sorry it didn't get to you sooner. I didn't get the approval from the other side on my last proposed language until this afternoon about, 11, maybe it was 11 or 12, something earlier today. So, all your consideration is appreciated.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Thank you, Mr. Gabbard. Anyone else? Motion by Mr. Thompson, second by Mr. Kelch to have all three readings. Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall, yes. Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Tracy?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion passes. Mr. Bonsall, may we have all three readings?
Yes. Ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into a utility easement agreement with Norwood Venture 1 LLC for 36-inch stormwater sewer pipe at 5050 Section Avenue and declaring an emergency. Ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into a utility easement agreement with Norwood Venture 1 LLC for 36-inch stormwater sewer pipe at 5050 Section Avenue and declaring an emergency. Ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into a utility easement agreement with Norwood Venture 1 LLC for a 36-inch stormwater sewer pipe at 5050 Section Avenue and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mr. Bonsall. Mr. Gabbard.
Motion to pass the ordinance?
Motion by Mr. Gabbard to pass the ordinance. Mr. Thompson.
Second.
Second by Mr. Thompson. Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall, yes. Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Dracy?
Yes.
Mr. Coach?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the ordinance passes. Moving on to item M, administrative reports. Mayor Schneider.
Thank you, President Miracle. A lot of stuff going on. Water meter replacement stuff that you guys just passed, I think that's a great step forward. Engaging Paycor will be a great step forward for the city in so many areas. It really has much more to do than just payroll administration. So that I think that, and them being here in our town and working with the HR director to come up with a package that works. I mean, this is one of those things where the auditor was not a big proponent of it last year. He wasn't a big proponent of it this year. But then when Keith came on and he started working with and helping explain and working with the auditor, he sort of brought him around. And now Jim is fully on with what Paycor can bring to the table for us, which is going to be really extremely helpful in that office and extremely helpful to our employees for their benefits administration. All across the board, it'll be helpful to all of our staff. So we're starting to work on some improvements, some off-season improvements that'll happen, like Waterworks Park. There needs to be a new line, not in Waterworks Park, but in Waterworks Pool, swimming pool. There needs to be a new liner put in. So we're getting that all in place. I shouldn't say all in place, I should say our ducks in a row, so that in the spring, that liner can be put in place before we open the swimming pool up. That's an important aspect to do all the upfront work. Clint continues to work on handicap curbs and stormwater, catch basin repairs. There's a lot of concrete work that's been done this year and will continue. Handicapped access at the health department. They just put the new handicapped ramp in, and then the stairs are all handicapped access. I don't know if you've been able to go past there. It's a nice improvement to our health department building. And, really have to, again, give kudos to the health department for all the hard work they did up front, getting all of our seniors vaccinated and making that system accessible. When they did it at the community center, they made it accessible. We had paramedics working with them. We had our nurses working with them. We had a huge group of volunteers working with them. And they continue to really push hard on the vaccinations and helping people stay safe, amongst other things that they are doing, that the health department is doing to keep us safe. Sometimes you don't think about the sanitarians that work in our health department that are going out and keeping our restaurants and all the other food service industry, keeping the public safe. So they do a lot of hard work. City Hall, as you come to City Hall, you can see that the front bollards are being rebuilt. Right now, they were crumbling and falling apart. That's all the brickwork. Then tuck pointing of City Hall will also be taking place. We're planning for the tennis courts to be resurfaced in the spring. We've got 3 tennis courts. 2 of them will be resurfaced just straight up as tennis courts and continue to be able for use for tennis play. The other one will be a multi-use court or multi-purpose, meaning that we're going to go ahead and put some pickleball courts in there. You'll still be able to play tennis at certain times, but you will also be able to set up and play pickleball, which is just another added amenity to the city of Norwood. So that'll all happen. Street signage upgrade on Montgomery Road is going to take place soon. I think the signs are made. These are street indicator signs that came out of the mini planning grant, or mini planning report that we received. So that'll be a nice improvement. If you've been to Hunter Park, if you haven't been to Hunter Park, you should go to Hunter Park. The fencing is up, new playgrounds are up, the bathhouse building has been painted, and actually it looks brand new. If you walk up to that, I thought they tore the whole thing down and put a new one up. But that park is really turning out nice. The fencing is up for the dog park, and it's a big dog park. It's going to be really nice. Fenwick's had improvements. Burwood has had improvements. All the parks. If you live in one of your areas, just go and take a look at the parks. There have been improvements, and there continue to be improvements. We're planning a lot of projects for next year right now. We're looking at streets, we're looking at everything that needs to take place, and we'll be working on getting all that in the budget. It is budget season, so all the department heads are starting to send their budgets in, and we're working on putting all that information together, so you guys will be seeing that in the future. That's really the end of my report. I do ask that at the end of this, that we go into executive session to discuss some employment issues within the city. So I hope that one of the council members will pull us into executive session after this so we can discuss that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Tracy?
Is there a reason why you would want to go into that for that? I mean,
Excuse me? I can't hear. I got this vent right over my head.
is it something you can't discuss in public?
No, that's why I would ask for it to go into executive session so that I can discuss it freely with the council members. That's the reason for executive session. And then later on, it would probably become public if that is the desire of council, but that's how it works. Unless I have a different, is executive session something different now?
Mr. Kelch?
Thank you, Mr. President. So earlier we briefly touched on some of the Elm stuff and got a lot of updates from Mr. Zimmerman. I think we were kind of like questioning like when the process that we got JMA doing now, is there been any update on when that is going to be finished and we can move on to the next phase?
Mr. Mayor?
Seriously, I'm having a hard time hearing anything that anybody says for some reason tonight. I mean, if you could, I apologize.
I'll try to speak a little louder. So we were talking briefly on the Elm stuff. Mr. Zimmerman was giving us a lot of good quality of updates, but we were talking about JMA's, the process they're in now, doing the assessments and all that. Is there any update to is that going to be done a little sooner, later, on schedule, so we can look at the next phase?
I think they're on schedule. I think what they were doing was scoping all the different pipes and putting together some engineering plans at that time. That's, as they stated in every meeting that we've seemed to have with JMA, it's the engineering part is a major project or major part of it. So my understanding is that they're still on schedule.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kelch. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Any other questions or comments for Mayor Schneider? Thank you, Mayor Schneider. Okay, move on to item N, unfinished business. Do we have any unfinished business this evening? No? We'll move on to new business. Any new business this evening? Mr. Tracy?
I know the mayor touched on Hunter Park. I went up today and I went through and documented, I guess, I recorded a video of what was going on up there. I did talk to a gentleman who's working on the sidewalk or the walkway up there currently, and he had stated that he was extremely impressed with the number of people who are utilizing the park as is now, with it torn up and the way it looks currently. So I'm excited that once it's finished, we're actually going to get a really good use out of this park. And hopefully we can kind of mirror the other parks in the same way over the coming years, because it's actually coming out a lot nicer than I expected, to be honest.
Thank you, Mr. Tracy. Any other new business? Anyone else? We'll move on from new business to communications. Item P1, Safety Service Director, Mr. John Murphy, reason regarding the appointment to City of Norwood Police Division. Mr. Bonzo.
Thank you. Dear Mr. Castellanos, so I apologize if I got that wrong. It gives me great pleasure to inform you that after the civil service testing and interview process, you have been chosen from the certified civil service list for employment with the City of Norwood Police Division as an entry-level police officer. This appointment is contingent upon your successful completion of the police academy, a physical examination, psychological examination, and pre-employment drug screening. You will also need to execute a pre-employment agreement with the City of Norwood prior to starting work. If you are in the process of obtaining employment with another police agency, the Chief of Police has asked that you withdraw your name from employment with the City of Norwood. Please call Chief Bill Kramer to schedule your test and coordinate your start date pending the results of your test. Once again, congratulations on your appointment to the City of Norwood Police Division. Sincerely, John P. Murphy, Director of Public Safety Service.
Thank you, Mr. Bonzo. Mr. Bernardo.
Please receive and file the letter.
Motion by Mr. Bernardo to receive and file the letter. May I have a second? Mr. Gabbard.
I second the motion.
Thank you. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall, yes. Mr. Gabbard.
Yes.
Mr. Tracy.
Yes.
Mr. Couch.
Yes.
Mr. Donato.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion passes. Item P2, Safety Service Director, Mr. John Murphy, regarding Norwood Fire National Recognition Award. Mr. Bonsall.
Thank you. Dear Mr. President and members of Norwood City Council, it is with great pleasure to inform you of a National Recognition Award from the American Heart Association to the Norwood Fire Department, who earned recognition for efforts to improve STEMI treatment in the city of Norwood, Ohio. Correspondence below from the Heart Association. Quote, the American Heart Association presents Mission Lifeline EMS Gold Level Achievement Award for implementation of quality care for severe heart attack patients. Norwood, Ohio Fire Department has received the American Heart Association's Mission Lifeline EMS Gold Achievement Award for implementing specific quality improvement measures to treat patients who suffer severe heart attacks. The American Heart Association's Mission Lifeline program helps reduce barriers to prompt treatment for heart attacks, starting from when 911 is called to EMS transport and continuing through hospital treatment and discharge. Optimal care for heart attack patients takes coordination between the individual hospital, EMS, and healthcare system. Your agency is part of an elite group of pre-hospital agencies recognized by the American Heart Association. The award recognizes your commitment and success in implementing a higher standard of pre-hospital care by ensuring that every STEMI patient receives treatment according to nationally accepted recommendations and standards. Thank you for your hard work and dedication. Congratulations, NFD. John P. Murphy, Director of Public Safety Service.
Thank you, Mr. Bonzo. Mr. Bonzo?
Yeah, I was going to say, I would move that we receive and file, and then hopefully we can hear from the fire chief on this.
Motion by Mr. Bonzo to receive and file. Mr. Gabbard?
I second that.
Second by Mr. Gabbard. Chief?
So for the new council members, maybe not be familiar with this, this is basically the third and the highest level that we can receive. The fire department in the last 3 years has been tracking at an exceptionally high level of efficient care for STEMIs, and this just further cements that the fire department that the city of Norwood provides is top notch. There is a lot of things going to providing emergency service. Equipment, apparatus, things that we brought up into the last year with your help. We appreciate that. But primarily, this award recognizes the staff members of the fire department who provide some of the best care out there possible. These guys are dedicated. They put in a lot of time and effort and training, and provide exceptional, compassionate service. So really, I'm here just to make sure that they're recognized for an outstanding service provision to not only the citizens, but the visitors in the city.
Thank you, Chief McCabe. Congratulations. Anyone else? Mr. Bonzo?
Thank you, Mr. President. So I just want to congratulate the fire department. So being here now, this is my 6th year. I've seen the progression as you all to get to the gold standard. I mean, because it takes years to keep hitting it. So thank you all for that and for all the work that you've done.
Thank you. Anyone else? Thank you, Chief. Please call the roll.
Yep. Mr. Bonsall, yes. Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Tracy?
Yes.
Mr. Couch?
Yes.
Mr. Donato?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes. All members present voting aye. The motion passes. Moving on to item P3, letter from Mayor Victor Schneider regarding the mayor's court fines. Mr. Bonzo.
Second.
I'm sorry.
I'd like to request that P3 and P5 be filed as read.
P3.
and P5.
So we have a motion from Mr. Geraci to receive and file as if read, item P3 and P5. Mr. Thompson?
I'll second that.
Second by Mr. Thompson. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall, yes. Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Dracy?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion passes.
Mr. President, if you could just say what those words for the general public.
Yes.
So it doesn't look like we're trying to hide anything, just so they at least know what it was. It was just kind of housekeeping.
Well, P3 was a letter from Mayor Schneider regarding the mayor's court fines, and P5 is from Mr. Chuck Barlow regarding the earnings tax collection report for August 2021. Thank you, Mr. Gabbard.
Thank you.
So that leaves us with item P4 from Duke Energy regarding increase in electrical distribution rates.
In the matter of the application of the Duke Energy Ohio Incorporated for an increase in electric distribution rates. To whom it may concern, Duke Energy Ohio, Inc. will be filing an application with the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio to increase our electric distribution rates. This request seeks to recognize in rates Duke Energy's investments in its electric delivery system needed to provide safe and reliable electric distribution services for our customers in Southwest Ohio. If approved by the Commission, the new electric distribution rates will take effect in 2022. Duke Energy Ohio's formal notice of intent to apply for new rates is enclosed, together with a summary of the rates that would result from approval of its application. These rates are subject to change after the Commission holds public evidentiary hearings. While this letter is a formal notice to you, we also have representatives available to discuss our rate proposal. If you have any questions about our rate proposal, please call our rates department at 513-287-2576, and we will respond to your inquiries. If you have other questions regarding our service, please call your Duke Energy Ohio Customer Service Manager. As always, we value your role as our customers and as the elected representatives of the communities we serve. Very truly yours, Amy B. Spiller, President, Duke Energy Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. Bonzo. Mr. Thompson.
Move we receive and file the letter.
Motion by Mr. Thompson to receive and file the letter. Mr. DiNardo. Second. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall, yes. Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Dracy?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
All members present voting aye, motion passes. Mr. DiNardo.
I think before we excuse absent members, I think this is appropriate to go to executive session.
Yes.
Right, Eric?
Can you
I already did, sorry.
Just the first paragraph.
I move to go into executive session to consider the appointment, employment, and/or compensation of a public official, a public employee or official.
Motion by Mr. DiNardo. May I have a second? Mr. Thompson,
I'll second that.
please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall? Yes. Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Dracy?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yep.
All members present voting aye. We are in executive session. And we are out of executive session. That brings us to item Q, excuse absent members. Mr. DiNardo.
Please excuse absent members.
Motion by Mr. DiNardo, second by Mr. Gabbard. Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall, yes. Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Dracy?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yep.
All members present voting aye. The motion passes. Item Mr. Gabbard.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn by Mr. Gabbard. We have a second, Mr. Kelch.
Second.
Please call the roll.
Yep. Mr. Bonsall, yes. Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Dracy?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
All members present voting aye. We are adjourned.